Welcome back to day 27 of our chess journey to 1500 ELO on chess.com. Well, after yesterday's loss, let's try and gain our ELO back and win a game today. We have an opponent from Uzbekistan called Kamrev 1225. Let's go ahead and play 1d4. We'll go for the Queen's Gambit setup. We might see this kind of a continuation. Typically I don't like playing this line because our opponent might have the line of the option of playing their bishop out here. But they go for the King's Indian defense. This is our first time facing this opening. I think, as far as I'm aware, there are some lines here where you play e4. I think so, at least, to grab the entire center. But I'm not that familiar with those. We might look into playing them, or looking for that move, at least. Either way, I think we are going to play knight f3 regardless here, so let's go ahead and play like this. I'm expecting a quick castle by them, or perhaps d6 or some alternative pawn push here. They are taking quite a while making their moves here, so they might be unfamiliar with our response here. If they go for this, we might have the long-term plan of doing something like this and getting their fianchettoed bishop off. I don't think we would want this trade though. But we might just go ahead and hit their knight like this first of all. Then they might bring their bishop out here. Or we might mirror their fianchetto setup and go for a Catalan kind of setup ourselves. I think I like that idea because we might have prospects along this diagonal here. And I'm not all that familiar with the most critical lines against the King's Indian. I see we have gone into the old Indian defense, which was apparently characterized by this d6 move. They bring their bishop out, which I think doesn't really matter to us because we are going to play this move regardless, I think. Let's try to be quick today so we don't lose on time. We might have h3 incoming, which would force their bishop either back or to trade, because this would trap their bishop. This also takes away the square for their knight here. And now we get the bishop here. I think we might play a bit defensively with our dark squared bishop for the time being here, simply because I think we want to utilize the bishop here and not get it trapped over here. So I think a solid e3 might be coming soon, or we might look at knight c3 or e3. I'm not really liking I don't like bringing our bishop out here, at least. After castles, they might have this move, but I don't think we would mind that, to be honest. Oh, I just missed a massive move here. Hopefully they don't realize. It seems I played a bit too quickly, trying to save time today. They do seem to respond correctly here. That's unfortunate, but it is how it is, and we'll just play on. The threat we had here was we could have captured their pawn, trapping their rook, and taking it afterwards like this. I think we'll go on ahead and play our knight up here. Or alternatively, I'm liking this, hitting their weak spot here. And then they would have to defend with the queen. But it might just be a one-move threat, which doesn't really do all that much. They might bring their queen all the way out here. Then we could move our knight up, but then our bishop is going to have development problems. So I think we might just start out with... I'm not seeing a lot of good moves for our knight, so let's go ahead and bring it out like this. Or rather, what I mean here, I don't see any good remaneuvering squares from D2. We might look at a timely D5 perhaps, but then they might close the center and our bishop here wouldn't have much to do. I'm still kind of disappointed I missed the idea of capturing on B7, but I'll try to look out for tactics here. I think this is in our interest, capturing here, as we could open up this diagonal. What happens here if they capture with this pawn? Then I think we might have a double threat here, like this. Applying pressure here, and our opponent might move up, but then we could probably capture here because we would have enough attackers. This would be a welcome sight as well, I think, as it would open up this. They might play e6 though in that continuation. They take with the pawn, and I think we still have this move. This adds an attacker here and attacks this. So how should our opponent respond? They might try to hit our queen. But then I think, typically speaking, we wouldn't want to do this, but I think we would open up the rook here and capture like this. But then I'm noticing at the end of the line here, their bishop takes our pawn. But our opponent would have a messed up pawn structure, doubled pawns here on the b file. So I don't mind that. And I'm curious as to whether we are going to get into that line or not. I think this is probably too weakening for our opponent. Doubling up their b-pawns intentionally, and they would be isolated as well, making them easy targets. We are seeing e6 now, which means our opponent intends to move their knight here. This would lose the knight, so after we capture here, they would move to this square. And then I think we might have this move, preventing our opponent from hitting our queen with their rook. Let's jump on in. And here we could position our bishop in the middle of the board here, hitting everything. Our opponent could look for this move. But if we just capture like this, we would hit the knight. And this doesn't look all that good for our opponent. So let's jump in like this, and soon we might close up with e3 here, defending our weakened d4 pawn. Our b2 pawn rather is looking a bit weak here, but we'll have to do for now. This move surprises me a bit. Essentially, it forces a queen trade, I think. And we are going to have this for continuing, or rather this position afterwards. Then we might just play a slow and easy e3. They can't take our pawn. And I think we would just play up a pawn and their queen activity would be killed off. They might try to recapture with the knight here, but then I'm not seeing any immediate threats. So let's just capture. They do have this move, which might just be nothing, I think. We could even play b3 here, which I'm considering, simply because it takes away the squares from the knight, but also defends our pawn on the potential open file here. But then once our horse gets kicked out, we would have to find some alternatives here. If we play e3 as we plan to do, then do we have any other options? Or are we going to get attacked here? That's the big question. I think this is just an empty threat. I'm not seeing a follow-up move for the knight. Actually, this might be annoying, as it might force our bishop off the board. I was considering this move, but I'm not really seeing the follow-up. This, if they hit our knight, I think we could just move it. But to where? It would have to be a retreating move. This might be a move. I think we'll play this regardless though. b3 is on the board. And e3 might be coming. I think eventually here our biggest asset, namely our queenside majority here, might decide the game, but that's not quite clear as of yet. This loses a knight. And curious here, do we have the option of playing rook f to c1? Then they would start doubling up. We looked at this move, but does it accomplish anything? I'm realizing here that our knight can't get hit with anything apart from this move, perhaps. And then we could reroute it backwards or potentially into this square, where it would hit the rook and it would prevent our opponent from doubling the rooks. So I'm liking this idea a lot. It might not be the best move, it might not even be close to being the best move, but it looks interesting to me. And it kind of annoys our opponent by removing their option of doubling the rooks. Here our opponent might have the option of jumping in with this knight, but if they do, then us capturing like this might be bad for our opponent, because this pawn would be weak, I think. I'm not quite sure. It might be okay for our opponent to play so like that, but I'm not entirely certain. And we might not have to address this immediately either way. Now we have to make the decision, do we drop back or do we hit the rook here? We just have to make sure our knight doesn't get trapped, as all of the retreating squares are covered by pawns. I think this is probably no good, as they could. I think they could just trap us and force us to trade 2 minor pieces for a rook, perhaps, which I don't quite like. So I'm not all that happy with this knight move anymore, and I'm somewhat regretting it. The thing is, I'm realizing all of the potential moves are just not working out. So we will have to play like this, I think. But when our opponent plays this move, we might have to go the long way around. Well, this is forced, I think, so let's go on ahead and jump back. We might also have the option of meeting bishop f8 with our own bishop move. Essentially trading knights, but then our opponent would have good control over c1. This knight is just jumping all over the place, and not in a good way. So where would our opponent move the knight here? Probably here, which would hit our bishop, which we wouldn't like. This is an awkward remaneuver. But I think this might be forced. We might have just stumbled into an incredibly unfortunate forced line, which kills us a bit positionally, but I don't think this is losing by any standards. It's just going to take us a bit longer to get into the game with our rooks. Our light squared bishop is looking a bit weak now, though. This is an incredibly good move by our opponent, seeking to cut off our knight move here, but then we might have this, I guess. Alternatively, we could play a3, forcing their bishop back, because they can't hit our rook, because then we capture. This doesn't work. This loses. I think a3 might be a good move here. So they would have to move back along this diagonal here, not here or here, as it loses the bishop. So either to e7 or f8. And here I think we'll have to move our knight up to connect our rooks again. And then look for a long-term plan. As I mentioned earlier on, our game plan here should be utilizing our pawn majority on the queen side to create a passed pawn, as we trade down equal material, hopefully. Our opponent is currently contemplating their options here, I think, and potentially realizing none of those aggressive options work out. So after they move their bishop and we go knight to d2, I think we should be set for a quick rook trade on the c1 square. Even from d2 it's going to be difficult to get our knight into a good position, but we might play a timely b4, but we would have to be a bit careful so we don't open up any moves for our opponent's knight here. I don't want to play a4 because then our opponent might try to close down our pawn mobility. Considering our opponent's time usage here, I'm going to have to double check whether we have any other options. They've calculated this apparently, but I don't really see the follow-up after we capture. And this capture is forced either way, I think, as this would be a mistake, I'm pretty sure. This is a fork after all, so let's go ahead and capture. Our opponent is looking to hit this and gain tempo for doubling up the rooks. But what happens if we drop our bishop back here? Not a whole lot, it seems. Those two moves here could potentially force the rooks off the board. First defending the pawn here, and then afterwards hitting the rooks, and we have our bishop here. So we might have this continuation here, which is what I'm looking at. And I think this would be in our best interest. And now we are expecting knight 8 to c8. Knight a to c8 rather. So let's look at other options here. I have been thinking about e4 for a while, but it would leave our d4 pawn a bit weak. We couldn't play it if we wanted to right now at least because of their knight. Well, now I think we are going into the line I mentioned, trading off the rooks, which I'm quite happy with as we have the bishop here and a pawn advantage. We are playing bishops versus knights here, and I'm quite optimistic about our chances in such a game. And then we might start thinking about remaneuvering our light squared bishop by playing e3 and moving it back perhaps. Then we would hit this pawn and maybe force it to move forwards. And then we might be able to create some play. So which options could our opponent have here? They played their knight back. I'm not really seeing the prospects of this move as they are moving into this line of sight here. I think our opponent wants this. then we can't capture like this because they would take this, I think. What happens if we play bishop to d2? I'm looking at this. I'm not all that happy with this. And I'm looking for an alternative here. So let's double check what happens here. Then if we hit the rook, I think it might have to go back. It might try to go here, after which we could probably hit the knight, or move up here actually, I think. I think I'm liking this. The recapture is forced. We are running out of time here, so I think we'll go ahead and do what we looked at. This would disallow us from playing rook to c1 though, which is a bit awkward. But here we might... I think this is going to be our move. And then we just play behind our pawns. And then we could introduce our light squared bishop into the position here, which I think would be good. e3 and bishop to d1, I think. So let's move up like this. They move their king. I think we play e3. And luckily their knights can't do a lot right now. Both of them are pretty much out of the game, at least until our opponent plays a couple more moves. I'm looking at the potential of playing e5 for our opponent, but I'm not seeing the follow-up. I think we go like this. And force our opponent's rook back. This is not a free pawn, at least. It feels kind of unintuitive making a backwards move here with our bishop, but let's go on ahead and do it. We are covering all the squares apart from a2, but if our opponent plays rooks to a2, I think they might just get the rook trapped. Or at least it would do very little this game. I would like to play like this, perhaps, after they move their knight, or their rook rather. Let's have a look at what I'm thinking. Let's say rook to c8, for instance. We capture, we go like this, And now we don't have our pawn, so that doesn't work. Is this too awkward, getting the open file? We have to address potential moves like this. Let's capture. They don't have this diagonal. We are in a time scramble again, so I'll try to play quickly. Moving back to get c1 for our rook. This might be the wrong approach. We might have had to play in this way perhaps, hitting the pawn. Because they can't play the rook back in that position, as we would take the pawn and they wouldn't have a capture. No forwards knight moves. This is what I'm looking at, but this x-rays the pawn. So where would they jump with the knight? I'm seeing no good squares. They could jump back, but then they pin themselves. After this and this, I think it's going to be difficult for our opponent to find a good move. And then we might even have a timely b4. Our bishops are doing a lot of work now, but we have to be careful of any knight jumps, as they are tricky pieces. I think once we win the a6 pawn here, the game should be pretty... From an objective point of view, it's probably going to be an easy conversion, but we have to be careful considering our time situation so we don't miss any tactics. Which is why I want to get the rooks off the board as quickly as possible to just have an easy game pushing our pawns. This move, I think we would meet. We can't capture here because of this fork. So after they move back here, I think we go on ahead and trade the rooks. This is a bit tricky considering our time situation. But I think we'll just go on ahead and grab the knight. They will take our bishop, and then we get this pawn, and I think we're in a good position. Now we can probably just push our pawns, and then our moves are probably going to be a lot easier. They trade off this pawn here, which gives us time to play our bishop back, was what I was going to say. I think a4 perhaps here, or b4. I think it might not matter as much how we do this, or that much rather, but we'll play a4 so that we can kick the knight like this. It's important we have our rook here covering the back rank, was what I was going to say, but we could move up to g2 at any point, as they don't have enough pieces to checkmate us at least. This is an interesting move. But what happens after this? They would have to move the knight somewhere. They could actually move it to one of those squares. I think we'll start bringing our king. We'll just have to play quickly here. We can't move here because of their knight, but we could try to get into another position, perhaps with a move like this. We dropped a pawn. That's unfortunate. This is really unfortunate. Let's try to move back here with our bishop and defend our pawn like this. We just walked into a fork, I'm realizing. And I see I'm starting to crumble a bit under time pressure again today. And we might just have a draw at our hands. Wow. Well, we'll have to go for this. This is probably an objective draw, but we might be able to get something from this. Our opponent is probably in a much better position considering our time situation. But we might still have some chances. Let's try and hit them from behind so they can't move up and coordinate their pieces. Let's hit the rook. I think our king belongs on g2 for the time being. Give them a couple of checks perhaps. This might be met with this move. Let's have a look at this. Now I think we would get a lot of king activity though. I'm disappointed by how I lost the two pawns we had connected. But that might not be the end of the world. Here we might have our opponent in Zugzwang. If we play f4, or f3 rather, they have to move their king back or move this pawn and lose it. What happens here? We will have to move back. How about g4? Captures, captures. I'm just not liking this a whole lot, as we would be forced back. So let's move up like this and pre-move the capture. This is probably still a theoretical draw, but we might find some chances. I'm expecting f6 here. And let's have a look at this. Captures, captures. We might have this move, I think, which might be tricky because we might have our opponent in opposition, but they might still be able to stand in the corner and get a draw, perhaps. If they capture and we capture with the pawn, we will, yeah, our opponent would have us in a position. But this and this, it would still be a draw, I think. Let's have a look here. Okay. So let's go up here. I think they're just going to keep the opposition, depending on how good their endgame tactics are. Do we have any tricks here? I'm not really seeing any. We might move back, but I think that nets us very little. So I think we might just go ahead and take this draw because I'm seeing no way of winning this. It's really unfortunate we got the draw from what I expect was a completely winning position, but once again I crumbled under time pressure, which seems to be a reoccurring trend here now, so I might have to play a bit quicker earlier on in the games, but then I seem to be missing other tactics. Either way, thanks a lot for the game, Kamrev1225, and let's jump on ahead into the game review. We had a pretty similar accuracy today. Let's jump on ahead here and see how we played. This was pretty standard, and apparently we had an advantage out of the opening. They captured, and here they blundered the rook, which I wasn't even considering might be an option. We should have reversed our move order here, apparently. Why couldn't they capture? I see, because despite trading 1 for 1 in terms of pawns, they would have horrible pawn structure. Well, we traded like this and got to this position, which was incredibly good for us. And here we played this move, which is marked as an inaccuracy, but the evaluation bar barely moves, so it's probably not that bad. Here we should have jumped in, and I'm curious as to why. What happens here? Yeah, we should have just traded, apparently. Which I guess makes sense. I was worried about them trapping our knight, but they wouldn't have had enough tempi, as we could have just traded off the rooks. Well, we went back and got into this position. Our opponent made a slight mistake. And here we were in a good spot. This is marked as another mistake, or inaccuracy rather. We should have went back, which in hindsight rather makes a lot of sense, as it keeps control over the c1 square, so we could have traded rooks. But we still had a decent position here. In this position we were decisively winning still. And here we should have probably won the game. we should have pushed this pawn. I was a bit worried with pushing this because we couldn't really connect our pawns in the following position. Did we have any other good options? Bishop to b5. Then it would have been difficult to move our rook though. Bishop to d3 was apparently good. And what if they had captured here? Yeah, because then this is no longer an option. I see. Well, here we made a massive mistake, followed by yet another mistake. In this position, we still had bishop to c4. Which, yeah, it still keeps the pawn at least. Well, this was another mistake, and this, I think, might have just been an equal endgame all the way. Why was this not a draw? It's because of Sugswan. They would have to either give up a pawn here, or if they moved like this, we would have had this. Apparently king to d5 is even good here, the second best move, which makes no sense, but f4. This is a bit difficult to spot with so little time though. This would have blundered. King to e7 though still makes a bit of sense, but I'm not seeing how we would have followed up here. This is difficult, very difficult actually to calculate with this amount of time. And from this point on, we had a draw. Well, that's our game for today, guys. I guess we are streaking by blundering away one positions, but at least we are consistently getting good positions, I think. I'll just have to work a bit on playing under time pressure, which I might do by perhaps playing blitz games, or maybe doing more tactics to spot them easier. But either way, thanks a lot for watching, and I hope to see you all tomorrow. Bye bye.